Welcome to 1337. Welcome to the future.
Most books demand your attention from a crowded shelf, but a rare few wait in silence, existing only for the person who stumbles upon them. If you consult a city planning map of Budapest, you will see a grid of documented districts and measured thoroughfares, but you will not find this specific street. On paper, it simply does not remain. On rare nights, in the quiet breath between 1 hour and the very next, a narrow cobblestone alleyway suddenly manifests. It is bathed in a soft, golden haze that bleeds from the stones themselves. Most people walk right past it, their eyes sliding over the gap as their rational minds entirely reject the anomaly. Stepping into that golden light requires a profound loss of direction, or exceptional bravery. It is a threshold that permanently shifts how a person perceives the world around them. Mark was a man built for this world. A fierce skeptic, he grounded his life in things that could be budgeted, measured, and explained. He had lived long enough to have no patience for the esoteric. That autumn night, the city felt unusually heavy. The air held a strange, clear sky stillness, the kind of pressure that usually precedes a sudden, violent shift in the weather. He paused at an intersection and saw the street. It wasn't the impossible light that rooted him to the spot, but a bone-deep ache of recognition, like the memory of a childhood home he'd completely forgotten. That sense of familiarity bypassed his logic entirely. Without a single conscious thought to stop him, Mark stepped away from the safety of the sidewalk and into the alley. Even a life built on cold facts can be fractured. Mark's rigid identity proved surprisingly thin as he followed that intuitive pull, leaving the measurable world behind. Halfway down the silent street, an unlit doorway stood slightly ajar. Inside, rows of blank, dustless books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. The air was entirely still, as if time itself had reached the threshold and decided to wait outside. Behind a heavy wooden counter sat a man who existed outside the current of the city. He didn't offer a greeting. He simply looked at Mark and said, "You are not supposed to find this place." Mark let out a short, defensive laugh, a reflex of his skeptical nature, but the shopkeeper didn't blink. He insisted that the shop wasn't actually there, only Mark was. Moving as if through water, Mark wandered the aisles until he saw it. A dark leather volume resting alone on a reading pedestal. It sat apart from the blank spines, waiting. The shopkeeper warned him that the book should not exist. Mark's logical brain screamed at him to leave, yet he felt a terrifying recognition. He knew that opening this cover would ruin the comfortable, measurable life he had built. The weight of the book felt like a threat to his entire worldview. To turn the first page was to trade his safety for a truth he could never unlearn. He opened it anyway. The heavy parchment was completely devoid of ink, but as Mark's eyes moved across the empty space, his mind filled with a sudden, rushing knowing. He felt the sharp, phantom scrape of a bruised knee from his childhood, a physical sensation more real than the room around him. Then came the hollow, suffocating ache of his first profound loss, a grief he hadn't revisited in decades. He watched his life's crossroads play out. Choices he believed were his own appeared as predetermined paths. The pages moved into unlived moments, the bitterness of a future argument, a distant departure. Finally, he saw a life-altering choice he was irrevocably destined to make. Gasping for air, Mark forcefully slammed the heavy book shut. His hands were trembling in the silent room. When he demanded an explanation, the shopkeeper's impassive face softened. He explained that this was a living record of a soul's entire existence across time. Mark tried to rationalize it, to call it impossible. The shopkeeper simply agreed. It was impossible, at least in the world Mark thought he knew. Existential panic set in. Mark asked if his whole life was just fate, if every step was a forced destiny. The shopkeeper offered a slow correction. The book didn't show what would happen. It revealed what had already been chosen. He told Mark the author was the one who chose to forget. The walls Mark had built around himself finally collapsed. He realized without words that his current name and his current life were not his beginning. His choices were made before he ever arrived in this body. He had found the shop only because his soul had asked to remember its own script. Mark looked at the book as if seeing his own reflection. Fate didn't feel like a cage anymore. It felt like a map he had carefully drawn for himself before the journey ever began. Mark stumbled back into the biting cold of the city. Behind him, the golden alleyway was gone, erased by the night. The noise of traffic and the ticking of time rushed back in. But the silence Mark carried from the shop stayed with him, vibrating beneath the mundane rhythm of his walk home. He could never find the shop again, but the awareness of the record remained. He knew now that beneath the surface of reality, his soul held the memory of every choice he had ever made. There is a danger in stumbling upon the pieces of ourselves we once chose to hide. If you ever find a book that feels like it was written entirely for you, don't ask how it got there. Ask instead why you were finally ready to find it. Have you ever had a conversation that felt identical to one you've had before? An exact replica down to the syllable. When Mark experienced the impossible, he retreated into the safety of a deliberate routine. He returned to Budapest and his bitter coffee. He walked the same heavy stone streets, letting the familiar rhythm of work and casual conversation wash over him. Yet whole hours would pass where he felt profoundly incomplete. Late at night, a physical pull would anchor in his chest. A massive part of his own awareness felt detached, as if it remained somewhere else entirely, standing in the dark, watching and waiting. Trying to outrun an impossible truth through habit does not erase the event. It only succeeds in alienating the self from its own reality. The unraveling began with small fractures. A casual chat with a colleague played out word for word exactly as it had weeks prior. On the city tram, a complete stranger turned and finished Mark's sentence a full second before he spoke it. This diagram illustrates the physical resistance Mark encountered. Every attempt to change his path, a different route, a different meal, was met with bizarre delays or closed roads that forced him back into alignment. Reality itself acted as a heavy machine, correcting his trajectory. The feeling in his gut grew heavier with each correction. This wasn't foresight, it was a memory. This sequence of events had already played out. True powerlessness is not found in random chaos, but in the suffocating perfection of a script you never realized you were reading. The mysterious street only reappeared when Mark stopped looking for it. On a damp Tuesday evening, the city shifted around him. The roar of traffic faded into a dead silence and a soft golden haze. As he stepped back into the shop, the panicked skeptic from his first visit was gone. He stood before the counter with a quiet, grounded certainty. When the shopkeeper noted he was not meant to return so soon, Mark replied that he hadn't returned. He was brought back by the system. He was no longer just observing a curiosity. He had begun the process of remembering himself. This shift in perspective, from victim to an active witness, changes the nature of the confrontation. Awareness is the first tool of intervention. The unmarked leather book was open on the counter. The pages were no longer blank. They were filled with overlapping, intersecting lives. This represents the architecture buried beneath. Every life followed this identical circular path. The same toxic decisions led to the same tragic endings. Even when making fresh decisions, branching lines snap right back into the primary loop. Every choice leads to the exact same final node. Leaning against the counter, the realization hit him. These weren't different people. They were all variations of himself. When Mark asked why he was trapped, the shopkeeper's answer was devastating in its gentleness. Because you have not chosen differently. The loop is not a punishment of fate. It is a cycle that holds us until we learn to make a conscious choice. As the realization took root, the ink dissolved. The rigid lines moved like iron filings over a magnet, shifting away from a fixed history. The book no longer showed a predetermined future. It showed wildly open, unwritten possibilities. The suffocating pressure of destiny evaporated, replaced by a far heavier burden, the staggering, intimidating weight of total free will. This freedom had been available in every lifetime, but his consciousness had been too asleep to see it. Absolute freedom is a difficult human paradox. It is often more terrifying than a fixed destiny, because it demands total accountability for our own suffering. Mark saw the book for what it truly was, a mirror reflecting his own internal architecture. It showed how a consciousness blindly bumps against the same walls, lifetime after lifetime, until it suffers enough to finally awaken. He left the book behind and walked out the door. The shop faded, and the chaotic world of Budapest rushed back in. The gray streets and the passing trams remained the same, but Mark's internal perception of them had shifted. There is likely no such thing as forbidden knowledge, only truth that requires a level of maturity we have not yet reached. True freedom is the responsibility of accepting that you are the author of what happens next. Mark spent months obsessed with deciphering reality's hidden rules, and then he simply stopped searching. The frantic need to decode the universe completely evaporated. The heavy feeling of resisting his own life disappeared. He stepped into active, willing participation. Standing on a crowded, uncomfortable commute, or feeling the sting of a cold wind, became a deliberate choice to experience the present. By leaning into his mundane daily frustrations, the constant anxious noise in his head vanished. The city remained loud and chaotic, but inside, he found an absolute absence of confusion. The feeling of being a victim to fate survives only through resistance. The moment you choose to experience life exactly as it is, that suffocating weight disappears. Without the hum of his own anxiety, time began to behave differently. Outwardly, the world marched on at its usual pace. Inwardly, his fleeting seconds stretched into long, unbroken durations of awareness. Inside those stretched moments, he noticed the gaps. He could feel the microscopic fraction of a second between a sudden loud noise and his body's physical reaction to flinch. He recognized the tiny pause between a thought arising and his mind deciding to attach. Within those silent, lingering spaces, a presence was waiting. It did not judge his actions, and it offered no divine guidance. It was simply there, quietly and endlessly observing. Finding this presence shifts the weight of existence. The character on the stage continues its movements, while the observer in the wings watches with a silent, absolute clarity. The final realization arrived in the glaring middle of the day. He was standing in a busy city square, surrounded by the screech of tram rails and the chaos of scattering pigeons. Without warning, the world caught like a stuck film frame in a projector. Reality paused, bathed in a glowing golden light blooming from the air. Mark realized he had never actually left this golden space. Standing before him was the librarian. His features wavered like a reflection in a pond, a gentle suggestion of a person lacking any solid boundary. This animated diagram shows what appeared between them next, the underlying framework of consciousness itself. It was a complex, elegant geometry of interconnected nodes, holding the overlapping weight of 1,000 different lifetimes. The physical world, with its trams and its coffee cups, is a localized point of focus. It is completely contained within a much larger, unseen architecture of pure awareness. When Mark asked aloud who wrote the book, the formless presence answered him directly. He did. He was the entity existing before any of his lives had ever begun, far removed from the specific identity of the man from Budapest. In that space, Mark experienced a conceptual collapse, a process where a strict human identity, the rigid ego, the given name, the logical fears, completely dissolves, allowing his entire mind to break its boundaries and expand back into a vast, limitless, and infinite intelligence. But why forget? Why put ourselves through the pain of not knowing? The answer is pure understanding, because to truly experience anything, there must be limitations. To actually make a choice, there must be the illusion of uncertainty, and first the act of forgetting. Human limitation serves as a deliberate, necessary mechanism. It ensures the experience of life remains visceral and real. The golden space vanished into the afternoon sun. Mark snapped back into the cold, moving reality of the crowded square, picking up the exact microsecond of time where he had left off. As he looked at the strangers rushing past, his perception was entirely different. He perceived life as an intricate design unfolding directly through him. And this is where the story merges with your own. This realization governs the exact room you are sitting in right now. True enlightenment requires fully recognizing your role as the ongoing architect of your own specific, messy life. The greatest mystery of human existence is the brave, deliberate choice we all made to forget our infinite nature. The metaphorical book of life lives within the present moment. It is being actively authored in real time, through your everyday choices and the friction of daily stumbles. The question is no longer about who wrote the script you are living. The question is, are you finally ready to accept that you are the author? You are the intelligence actively generating reality. Your life is the story you are telling yourself.
Thanks for watching. Tap into 1337studio.ai